Okay, if you watched the previous two videos, thank you for your time, and I hope that you learned something, or I hope that you thought I was right, or you thought I was wrong, and you expressed it, and you felt better about it, or that you were able to educate someone who was misled by my video, or, whatever the case may be. So now we're going to talk about money, right? I just want a nice backdrop. Oh, it's just is money. All right. So that's kind of disturbing. But anyways, the most important thing about money today is probably that it's losing value all the time, which is not what I want to talk about. The thing that I really want to talk about is how much money people should make. You have people who are economists. Milton Friedman, is gone, but he was a really smart guy and he had really good ideas. Uh, and and I say that in terms of like generally, he thought about things and he presented them in a really nice way. Whether they're right or wrong, you can disagree or agree, but they were good ideas in terms of just the general appreciation of getting an idea out there and presenting it that had logic behind it. Okay. So he was against the minimum wage. His case was, as I understand it, that if you raise the minimum wage, you're raising the initial cost to achieve labor. Okay. And that therefore you're manipulating the market. He was a big free market kind of guy. I don't think that he was to the extent that some people are like free market people. Like I talked about Enron in a previous video. Enron turned power on and off in California to make profit, and if you have a free market, you're not regulating that, so it doesn't happen. So that's the case against free markets. Okay, the case for free markets is probably some example where some company was able to make a lot of money and they weren't restricted, right? And then there were lots of jobs and lots of profit and everybody's happy. Great. So, anyways, back to Freeman. He's anti uh, minimum wage. He thinks that when minimum wage is raised, a few things happen. One, the dollar goes down, so everybody's making less money anyways. And then two, uh, your low skilled workers have a harder time finding work. So if you've got inexperienced people like teenagers, or if you have elderly people who are perhaps working a little slower as we get older, our body, maybe we need to move a little slower, so we'll do a little bit less, a little bit less intense work. And so maybe the value of our work might be a little bit, we don't want to charge people so much for it because it's not going to be as fast as someone that we're competing with, right? Because it's a competition. And then you get into like really complex things, from there. Because you can talk like, you want to pay a male worker or a female worker more. Like, well, male statistically can lift this much, weight doing this particular maneuver because of the way that their bodies are actually, developed over time and the way that their bones are structured. Our bones are actually structured a little bit different in the pelvic region because, well, one of our genders has babies and one doesn't. Okay. So like, and then you can watch like strongman competitions or strong woman competitions, and you can see the kind of lifts that are advantageous to certain physical aspects. And I don't want to get into that because I'm not trying to talk about gender in this video. What I'm trying to talk about is that there ends up being this glass ceiling for one or the other genders because they favor certain jobs. Okay. And there's like aspects of the brain to consider, different ways that different people tend to think about things, and some of it's subjective and some of it is, agreed upon by a lot of people, but a lot of it is very incendiary and controversial. So I'm not going to get into some of those details, but I just will highlight that there are differences. And if you don't agree with me, then you can talk to someone for the other gender about a very large variety of things until you figure out that, hey, they might be thinking differently than me, right? Like I think that's a thing that you can empirically test, uh, that they probably don't think just like you, right? And I'm not saying that you will think like other people. Like, gosh, this really just got into a quagmire of horrible things, right? So let's just put that to the side, all right? And let's get back to like how much money people should make. I'm gonna say my bias right away. I grew up poor. Okay, I grew up very poor. Uh, I am a skilled person. I make money on my skill. I went to school to become skilled at certain things, and I paid a lot of money to do that. And then I started with a certain amount of natural talent, and I relied on a certain amount of invested skill that I had, done certain homework, or I had understood certain principles, or I had myself done things to get myself experience to be more familiar with a thing, so that then I could grow on that doing other things, right? So there are skilled workers out there, and they have, you know, they're making money off of that skill that they perform. And then there are people who are less skilled, they've invested less time into doing whatever they're doing, and they're making money doing, whatever they're doing. And they're still developing a skill, but maybe it's not a trade craft, okay? It's not like welding. They're not like, the best welder in the world. Maybe they've just like started welding last week or whatever, like whatever the situation is, and maybe their education is more focused in one kind of welding or another kind of welding. And so you have these different amounts of money that you're going to pay to these different people because they have these different skills. But my bias is one of electrical engineering skilled worker. I consider myself pretty skilled at it, and rather experienced at this point. So I was poor. I make a fair amount of money. I make it off my skill, and it's kind of a craft for me. Okay, and so for me, I have a bias that I think, I want poor people to be able to make money. I really don't want minimum wage in terms of like I think everybody's going to make less money. I agree on a lot of the points that were made by Friedman, as I discussed, that if they raise minimum wage, the dollar value is going to go down, and unskilled workers aren't going to be able to get into the market as easily. But at the same time, because I was poor and because of my altruistic side, I definitely think that it's not a living wage. $7 an hour. It's 14,000. Yeah, it's $14,000 a year. If you just sit and just think about making $14,000 a year as your annual income, you are immediately eliminating several things that you just can't afford to do. Okay, you're just not going to be flying around the country uh, on an airplane willy nilly for one, right? Like that's just something you will not be able to do because it would cost $2,000 to go from here to China if we weren't in a pandemic, and you could do that right now, and you could only afford to do that 7 times, and you would also have to afford food, right? So like we can agree on the capability limitations of that. Not that you can do that if you make like 50,000 or 60,000 or whatever, but like these limitations are pretty steep for a $14,000 income. If you're a teacher or you're a cop, 60 to 40,000 somewhere in there, whatever. What I mean, you can go on a number of different websites and look up how much different salaries make, right? You can even look up, well, how much does an electrical engineer make, and you can just find out approximately what I make and ballpark it, right? Uh, but the point that I'm trying to get to in this is that I believe that the most important thing that you can look at is how much people should make. Uh, Everybody can agree that everybody should make enough to feed themselves, clothe themselves, shelter themselves, raise a family. That's like the American dream should be attainable. And you don't want these people being homeless. But you don't want freeloaders either. Like you don't want to just pay people and them not work because then no one would work and then no one would have services or goods or any of these other things that they need. Uh, and our society is simply too big for everybody to be a gatherer at this point. Like you can't just all go out hunting every day because you have to farm resources. We have to farm resources. You don't, but someone in our society has to. And so basically, the most important thing becomes, well, how do you make it so that people are paid enough to sustain their living and have their family? They're encouraged enough to work, and they're not taking advantage of other people and making them do things for a wage that is basically slavery, or like that. I probably shouldn't have said that because slavery is totally, you're not getting hit with a stick, right? No one is whipping you if you go to work today. So you're not, it's not slavery. It's nowhere near slavery. No one is whipping you, right? But at the same time, you might die homeless because you can't you can't prove that you're valued is more than minimum wage. Right? It's a really sad reality of it, but it is a reality of it. And what I propose, or what I think is best, is it doesn't even fully address that, right? Because it's just like a possible solution out of many solutions that might be the best available one, right? And I don't want to. I didn't mean to hide it this far into the video. It's just simply that that no one in the world is going to make 1,000 times more effort inside of an hour than another individual. I don't care how skilled I am. I don't care what I know, what I don't know. If I'm performing it in an hour, it's not worth 1,000 times more money than someone else 1 hour, because they had damn well better be able to do what I do, with enough training. So like I'm an electrical engineer, it took me maybe 10,000 hours, whatever it was, to be considered good as an electrical engineer. I'm not saying that someone else's 10,000 hours is going to be equal to mine, that they're going to be able to be as skilled as I am in the same amount of time. What I am saying, though, is that they certainly within 1,000 hours could do the task that I'm going to do, right? I'm going to program something. Well, they ought to be able to be trained within 1,000 hours. Okay, so that amount should be able to be accomplishable. And then on the other side of the spectrum, people who disagree with me, they're going to say, well, this company is successful. They have this CEO, and this CEO is doing this thing, and it makes X amount of dollars. So therefore, because they make X amount of dollars for this company, they are worth this percentage of those dollars. Sube, or whoever, but I don't know exactly her name for sure. The CEO of AMD is making so much money for AMD. So therefore, let's pay her all the money. Whatever the case is, however much it is. Yeah, sure, I can see that argument, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. And there are definitely going to be people who are going to be in that department. You're going to run a business. You want to make as much money off of your business as possible. And I'm not trying to propose something crazy. I'm just saying 1,000 hours. And so if you can't make 1,000 times more money than your lowest paid employee, if your lowest paid employee is paid $7 an hour, you can't make $14 million a year. Okay, if you're paying someone $14,000 a year, you shouldn't be able to make 14 million a year. That's my whole premise, right? That's the most important thing, right? Is that we're looking at it as minimum wage, trying to get that minimum in there. Like that's the most important thing. But our problem is that our politicians are stupid, because it doesn't matter. Because tying the high end to the bottom end is the only thing that's going to make an actual difference. The dollar value is just going to devalue, and they would just pay the high end more. Okay, that's how it would work. But on the flip side, the consequence is, let's say that Bezos is making however many billions a year, whatever it is. So what if he just stops? He just raises everybody's pay, right? So now all the employees have to be skilled to make however much money that is, right? Well, sure, you can do that, but then competition will balance that out, would be my counter argument. And so that's where, like, you'd have to make your own decisions, like, is this really an important video? Is it not an important video? Like, is that saying something? Isn't it saying something? Well, yeah, tying the high end to the bottom end is pretty darn important as a general idea. And so that's where this video is. That's what it's about. And there's other ways to make money. You can use your money to make money. You could be self-employed. You can make as much money as you want self-employed. If you can make $30 million and you're only employed, then yeah, I don't have a problem with you not employing other people. And then someone else could come along and they could say, well, but you're going to pay for goods. So how do we tie how much money you make into how many goods you make? Because maybe people will just not have employees, right? They'll do the non-combatant circle jerk around that, right? Like whatever it is. Like, I don't mean to just throw buzzwords at you and not explain them. They basically could make it so that everybody's 1099, right? You're 1099, so therefore I don't have to pay you minimum wage, or you're 1099, so therefore. But so the actual legislature for that protection, so they guarantee that minimum wage for everybody, is a little bit more complicated than just, oh, everybody can't make $1,000 more. No, it's slightly more complicated than that. You have to then look at, you have to define what you're paying people to do. And so if you are that person who's investing money, their own money, to make more money, or if you just bought like tons of Bitcoin and held it forever and then you had lots of money, then like a certain amount of that per year would have to be tied in. And and then the other aspect of this is that there are people who are like, communists or socialists. Everybody should be paid the same regardless of what they do. Or there's thoughts like, you know, the government should have centralized everything and then they should tell you what to do. Or, you know, everybody should pay in taxes a certain percentage or a flat rate, or all these other complicated things. But I think today, in today's atmosphere, the most important thing is just making sure that we protect our homeless people, and they get shelter, and that everybody who is working is making a living wage, and that they're able to support themselves, and that people aren't just making as much money as possible without any kinds of limitations on that. Like like I understand the attractiveness of that for some people, but at the same time, I think that we all can agree that uh, you don't want you don't want anyone that you care about to be homeless. You don't want them to be poor, and if you truly cared about people who are in those situations, then you would agree with some kind of management for those situations. And another part of my bias, I do have a family member or two that are on welfare, or Social Security or whatnot, and there is an element to the economy that revolves around you know having an ever-growing population, where you just keep having more people. So then, because you always have more people, you can always pay for the people behind you that came before you, because you'll have a growing population. And so, is Social Security affordable becomes a factor. Well, if you cap the top end to that 1,000 reasonable rate, that money that is made in addition either goes into reinvestment or to fund these programs, right? And so, uh, I'm not trying to say like AOC is crazy because she wants to tax, anyone making over a certain amount of money, all the rest of that money. Or I don't want to say like AOC is the best because she does that. I just want to say that somewhere there, the high end and the bottom end need to be tied together. All right. And that's my personal bias. And that whether you agree or disagree with this idea, it is something that everybody needs to be aware of. They need to be aware of the consequence of looking at this with only the idea of the minimum wage. That there are these consequences of the low skilled worker who can't get employed, or the devaluing of the dollar. And at the same time, they need to be aware of consequences of trimming the top end. The demotivation that some people might do to make more jobs for other people is a concern. Because if you can only make, you know, X amount more than your lowest paid employee, you might just opt for some efficiency of that. Like, oh, I can only do that? Well, I guess 14 million's it, so I'm only going to have a business that makes $14 million. And I've just trimmed whatever technical advances, or I stopped the cure from cancer, whatever the case may be, right? So those are things that need to be evaluated in that gray space, and with bias, obviously, on both sides. But that's the most important thing, I think, is to make that evaluation of the top end, tying it to the bottom end. The only other thing that I think is really important right now is that uh, money is depreciating. It's always going down. It's controlled by banks. It's used in loans. There's interest, and money's being made more places, and items are always going on sale, and there's a competitive market for making money, and that sort of thing. And one of the things that ends up happening is that the value of the dollar goes down, uh, to either benefit or play its role in these things. And it's being printed, right? So it's being produced, so there's more of it circulating. Okay. And so, without getting into any of the math, uh, then there's things like Bitcoin, which is a finite resource, or gold, which is currently a finite resource. Like right now, it's very inefficient to turn gold into anything else. Like if you were to able to remove certain elements of the atom of gold, right, on a large scale, and change it into some other element, right, it would be really inefficient, and you wouldn't do it because it would just cost so much. And so, like right now, yeah, gold has a certain value, and it's very much uh, a finite thing, and so its value should go up over time, especially compared to the dollar. And Bitcoin, although it's a virtual currency, is in that situation. It's finite. There's a certain number or allotment of, how do you even say it? Evaluations. That's probably not the right term. No. Satoshis. Bitcoins, I guess you would say. There's a finite number of Bitcoins, if you will, amount of this digital currency. And because it's finite, that means that its its value is limited. And when a value is when when it's limited like that, it grows. That's like how that works. I think I would have to get into the math to explain that to you. I guess to explain it in a video, not to you particularly, but whoever wanted to know that thing. It's like hmm. Yeah, I guess it's like if there's 10 pieces of pizza, there's one left, and everybody wants it. The demand is there because maybe you can get another pizza with that pizza or something. Like whoever has the last pizza can have this other thing, or maybe you want someone to do your laundry, but they really want that piece of pizza, but someone else wants their laundry done, so they want that piece of pizza to trade it for the laundry, you know, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like the barter system, if you will. And then it becomes more valuable because there's a limited amount of them, and there's an unlimited amount of things that people want, right? So therefore, so on and so forth. Whereas with the dollar, there's an unlimited amount of dollars, so eventually things will just not be worth as much because the supply is unlimited, right? So anyway, and it's more complex than that. I mean, I'm making a very gross summarization of a very complex thing, but the most important thing, if you take one thing away from the video, is that if we tie the top end and the bottom end of those two things, that that people don't do 1,000 times more work, so they should be paid 1,000 times more. And to give you some numbers, so if you make $7 an hour, it's $14,000 a year. If you made 1,000 times that much, it'd be 14 million. It's just two times the number and then 1,000 added to the multiplier, right? So it's very simple math. $22 an hour, $44 million a year, or whatever it is. So it's and then if it's 2,000, that's 44,000 a year. So $22 an hour is 44,000 for that worker, and then if you were limited it by the thousand, it's 44 million. So it's very straightforward math. If you want to do any of the calculations and see how it ends up, what can you buy with 44 million? You're paying your workers $22 an hour, but you can only make 44 million. Now you can't buy XYZ jet. You can't own your personal jet. It costs 160 million. You'd have to shave up so long, and it's just not worth it or whatever. So now you've eliminated a whole entire industry, and this issue just became that much more complex, right? But you get the idea. In one scenario, everybody has a living wage. And then I didn't address the case of the poor. Like you got to take care of them. Like some people just they're injured, they're disabled, they mentally disabled, whatever the case is. So this video is quite long, 24 minutes. It's a very important one. I'm going to move on to my next topic. Um, I'm not sure if I'm going to do another one right away. I think I've covered a lot. The political bias, you know, how much money people should make, uh, the stock market, the metadata, the meta of playing how people are investing in it rather than the actual underlying asset. Um, I think I'll just see how these three go. There's more I want to talk about. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of stuff that's like, yeah, it's good for this group, it's bad for that group, or it's good if you look at it this way, it's bad if you look at it that way. But I really wish that more people had those videos where they just talked about things with both bias openly. Anyway.